Thanks so much, Nathan. Massive round of applause. And I asked this question a while ago. Has a book truly changed my life? I've read quite a lot of books, and probably like the answer go, well, maybe not like sort of state it as life changing. Definitely affected me, but that book is perhaps one that you put in your maybe small life-changing library. Is that fair to say?
It's a very easy book to read, and it's relatively short. It's £2.50 on Kindle. So.
And then it's £2.50. Go on, get it. Change your life for £2.50. Well, thanks so much for that. So things that I've been thinking about a lot recently as I will approach just I'm obviously younger, but I'm hitting 46 this year. So yeah, it's a very timely one for me as well. Okay, well, please, get some questions in the chat for Nathan, but we'll move swiftly on to Antoinette. So Antoinette is the founder and managing director of With Insight Coaching and Training, award-winning consultancy based in the UK with a client base that spans the globe. She's also a long-time friend of mine and one of the loveliest and smartest folks I know. So I'm bloody delighted she's here to share her 5 things. So Antoinette is going to share her insights from The Gift by Edith Eger. Antoinette.
Thanks, Andy. So I chose this book because I really like feisty women, and I'm always incredibly impressed and intrigued by anyone who can come through life's trauma and trials and tribulations and come through wiser and kinder and more loving. So it's like perfect, the perfect book after Nathan's, actually. And I don't think anyone demonstrates that better than Dr. Edith Eger. I was also drawn to this book because Edith is a contemporary of my mother. And my mother was born in Haguenau on the border of France and Germany in 1932. She was French and Catholic, and Edith was Hungarian and Jewish. But they were both very similar. They were both quite shy and unassuming women. And as adults, they were both haunted by some of the terror of growing up during, what can only have been the unimaginable horrors of the Second World War. So my mother was very lucky, and a bit like Nathan was just talking about, she managed to find sanctuary in a really calm and steady safety in her marriage. Some of us don't have that luxury, and Edith's way was through therapy and through finding these life lessons that enabled her to move through some of that trauma. So Edith was 16 in the spring of 1944. She was living with her parents in Kassa in Hungary. And one cold day in April in 1944, the Jews of Kassa were rounded up and imprisoned in an old factory at the edge of town, in an old brick factory. A few days later, they were loaded onto a cattle car bound for Auschwitz. And The Gift, this book, really tells of her life story through the lens of her own life experiences and through her clients. And she identifies the 12 lessons that enabled her to liberate herself from some of the trauma and the grief and the horror of those 12 months that she spent in the death camps. So the most important thing about this book is, as it says, it's about strength, hope, and freedom. And it offers us all 3 a reminder of our agency and our power to overcome. So lesson 1. There's no Prozac in Auschwitz, the prison of avoidance. So when Edith was in Auschwitz, she had no way of numbing out or taking the edge off the full terror of the cruelty she experienced at the hands of the capo who ran the death camps. She lived in the constant fear that she and her beloved sister could and would be murdered at any moment. And there was no real avoiding the brutal reality of her situation. She writes, our only option was to learn to be good observers of ourselves and our circumstances. We had to learn to just be. There was no crying in the camps. The feelings would come later. And for many, many years, she managed to avoid them and to keep running away. Then when Edith's daughter Marianne was 5, she came home from school crying because she hadn't been invited to a birthday party. And Edith confesses that at that time, she didn't know how to let Marianne have her feelings or even how to be present with her own feelings. Edith's denial of her repressed trauma in Auschwitz left her incapable of guiding Marianne through her sadness and her disappointment. And her remedy, same with my mum, for every upset was to eat something sweet. So she led Marianne to the kitchen, gave her a chocolate milkshake and a big slice of Hungarian 7-layer chocolate cake. Subsequently, Edith started to do her own work on her own repressed feelings. She learned that we disable our children when we take away their suffering. We teach them that feelings are wrong or scary. She writes, it's better to allow their feelings and to keep them company. A feeling is just a feeling. It's not an identity. There are many good reasons why we avoid our feelings. They're uncomfortable, or they're not the feelings we think we should be having, or we're afraid of what they could mean, or what they might reveal about the choices we've made, or the choices we're about to make. As long as we're avoiding our feelings, we are denying reality. She encourages us to invite our feelings in, to sit with them and to keep them company. Then you can decide how long you are going to hold on to them. You are not a fragile little somebody, she writes. You can face every reality. And the two key points that I took away, the two kind of messages were, you can't heal it if you can't feel it, and everything is temporary. So lesson 2, all relationships will end, the prison of self-neglect. So one of our first fears is of abandonment. We learn early on how to get what she calls the 3 A's, attention, affection, and approval. And we figure out what we need to do and whom we need to become in order to get those needs met. And the problem is not that we do those things, it's that we keep on doing them into adulthood. And we think that we must do those things in order to be loved. So it's very dangerous to put your life into somebody else's hands. You are the only one that you're going to have for a lifetime. All other relationships will end. So the question is, how can you be the most loving, no-nonsense caregiver to yourself? And the 3 takeaways from this lesson this chapter were, for me, everything we practice, we become better at. So savor those pleasant sensations, that first sip of coffee, the sound of the rain on the roof, and take time to notice and experience joy. She also recommends what she calls work, love and play. She says, make a chart that shows how much time you spend every day working, loving, and playing. All three are all three roughly in balance? How could you structure your days differently so that you could have more of whatever is currently receiving the least of your time or attention? And then lastly, show yourself some more love. You know, what could you do today that would be a radical act of self-love? And I think that actually every act of self-love is pretty radical. Okay, lesson 3. Okay, are we ready for this one? Sorry I always like to go for the jugular. Would you like to be married to you? The prison of resentment. The biggest disruptor of intimacy is low-level chronic anger and irritation. Edith resented her husband Bella for his impatience and his ill temper, and for all the ways he remained stuck in the past. Interesting how she was resenting Bella for stuff that she was also herself struggling with, I think. This resentment festered for so many years that she thought the only way to free herself was to divorce him. It was only after they split that she realized her disappointment and anger had little to do with Bella and everything to do with her. The real problem lay with her own unfinished emotional business and her unresolved grief. She explains that when we're angry, it's often because there is a gap between our expectations and reality. We think it's the other person trapping and aggravating us, but the real prison is our unrealistic expectations. We fall in love with love or with an image of a person to whom we've assigned all the traits and characteristics that we crave. or with someone with whom we can repeat the familiar patterns we learned in our families of origin. We present a false self, seeking love and a secure relationship, but at the same time giving up who we really are. Falling in love is a chemical high. It feels amazing, and it's temporary. When the feeling fades, we're left with a lost dream. And so many salvageable relationships are abandoned in despair. But love isn't what you feel, it's what you do. So she describes her client, Marina, a dancer and a performance artist who came to Edith to help her figure out if her marriage was salvageable. Now, Marina and her husband had apparently been fighting every single day for 18 years, and she was concerned about the impact that this was having on their teenage daughter. She didn't want to continue as things were, and she didn't see any way of making things better except for leaving. Edith tells her, every choice has a price, something you gain and something you lose. One choice we can always make is to do nothing, to decide not to decide, to keep going the way we are going. At the other extreme, you can decide to leave the relationship and file for divorce. You don't have to sit there in this bad situation. However, Edith points out, a divorce can be an extreme way of continuing to do nothing. She asks Marina, what do you stand to gain from a divorce? It does give you a piece of paper that says that you are now free to marry someone else. It doesn't resolve the emotional business of the relationship. It just gives you legal permission to repeat the same pattern with someone else. It doesn't make you free. Marina will still be required to heal the wounds she brought with her into the marriage she will keep carrying for the rest of her life until she deals with them. So a more useful question that Edith asks her is, are you stronger with him or without him? And only you can decide if a relationship depletes or empowers you. But it's not a question you can answer quickly. You can't know the truth about your relationship until you deal with your own wounds, until you bury and leave behind all the things from the past you're still dragging around. You don't have to figure this out in a hurry. It's an answer that will come to you by playing more, by living your life more fully, and by being who you really are, which is a person of strength. So again, the quick takeaways from this that I've found really useful were, she talks about change the dance steps. Many couples have a 3-step cycle of conflict: frustration, escalation, and then making up. She says, what are the frustration triggers that keep going unresolved in your relationships that you're just repeating? The second thing she says is take care of your emotional business. What is the message about love that you may have learned as a child that you are carrying into your relationship? Answer the sentence, if you love someone, then. Would you like to be married to you? Really important, and though confronting, what qualities do you think create a comfortable and thriving relationship? Okay, lesson 4. What didn't happen? The prison of unresolved grief. It is a universal experience for life not to turn out how we want or expect. Most of us suffer because we're given something that we don't want, or we want something that we don't have. The inner work required to process this suffering is what Edith calls grief work. She writes, all therapy, and I would argue coaching, is grief work. It's a process of confronting a life where you expect one thing and get another, a life that brings you the unexpected and the unanticipated. Grief is often not about what happened, it's about what didn't happen. And when we deny or minimize our grief or loss, we become prisoner to it. Resolving grief means both to release ourselves from the responsibility of all the things that weren't up to us, and to come to terms with the choices we've made that can't be undone. Edith reminds us that grieving is difficult, but it can also feel good. You can revisit the past, you can embrace it. You're not stuck there. And again, she reminds us you are strong. You can come to terms with what was and what wasn't. and you can concentrate not on what you've lost, but on what is left. The choice to live every moment as a gift and to embrace what is. And then the fifth lesson, there is no forgiveness without rage. People often ask Edith, how can you ever forgive the Nazis? She says she doesn't have the godly power to anoint anyone with forgiveness, to spiritually cleanse others for their wrongs, but she does have the power to free herself, and so do we. Forgiveness isn't something we do for the person who's hurt us. It's something we do for ourselves. So we're no longer victims or prisoners of the past. So we can stop carrying a burden that harbors nothing but pain. Another misconception about forgiveness is that the way we make peace with someone is that we need to make peace with someone who has harmed us, is to say, I'm done with her, I'm not going to deal with her anymore, or him. It just doesn't work that way. It's not about cutting someone out, it's about letting go. As long as you say you can't forgive someone, you're spending energy being against rather than being for yourself and the life you deserve. To forgive isn't giving someone permission to keep hurting you. It's not okay that you were harmed, but it's already done. No one but you can heal that wound. This kind of release doesn't come easily. It's not an overnight process, and lots of things get in the way. The things that get in the way could be a desire for justice or revenge, an apology, or even just an acknowledgement. But life doesn't have to depend on what you get or what you don't get from someone else. Your life is your own, and forgiveness isn't something you give someone else. It's how you release yourself. So the biggest barriers of forgiveness is the necessary reckoning with our rage. Edith says there is no forgiveness without rage, and silent rage is self-destructive. If you're not actively, consciously, intentionally releasing it, you're holding on to it. And that's not going to do you any good. And neither is venting your anger. That's when you blow your top, and it can be cathartic in the moment, but the people around you foot the bill. So, how do we feel our rage? Edith says, first we need to legitimize it. You have a right to feel rage. It's a human emotion, and you are human. When we can't release anger, we either deny that we were victimized or we deny that we're human. That's basically how perfectionists suffer. Either way, we're denying reality. So anger is a secondary emotion, and it's a defense armor we put up around the primary feelings underneath. We burn through our anger so that we can get to usually what's underneath, which is going to be either fear or grief. Only when we can begin the hardest work of all, which is forgiving ourselves and processing those underlying emotions. So it took Edith many years to work through the anger and the grief to release Mengele, the German SS officer in charge of Auschwitz in 1944, and Hitler. And it took many years to forgive herself for surviving when so many of her loved ones died. The takeaway from this chapter really for me is that we're born innocent, and we all have the power to free ourselves from our own mental prisons, no matter what happens to us. Okay, so in conclusion, I'm just mindful of time. There is a Hungarian adage that says you find the darkest shadow beneath the candle. Our darkest and brightest places, our shadows and our flames are intertwined. Life with its inevitable trauma, pain, grief, misery, and death is a gift. A gift we sabotage when we imprison ourselves with fear and resentment and failure and abandonment. The final lesson that Edith offers us is the one that she learned in hell. We can decide what kind of life we want to have. We can either do the inner work required to liberate the untapped potential lying in the shadows, and we can reveal and reclaim who we really are: strong, creative, innocent, and lovable. I want to leave you with her final thought. Honey, may you always choose to give up the prison and to do the work to be free, to find in your suffering your own life lessons, to choose which legacy the world inherits, to hand down the pain or to pass on the gift.
Bloody hell.